What's up, guys? We should be live. Uh, as always, if you can see and hear me, please let me know in the chat if there's any issues with the sound or video. I do have to apologize. I am visiting family, and I couldn't get any of my audio or video equipment to work today. So I've got my laptop camera and my laptop microphone, unfortunately. So my setup is not going to be great, but fortunately, that's not going to matter that much because it's mostly going to be Andrew and Zoe talking today. I'll just kind of be the interviewer. Let's see. Can anyone let me know in the chat if you can see and hear me? We should be live, but I like to wait for confirmation. So one thing I want to mention before we get started, before I bring Andrew and Zoe on, is, as I mentioned before, or as you've probably seen in our emails, our New Year sale is going on. So right now we've got 30% off anything in store. That's Chinese products, Japanese products, all of our courses, dictionary, everything. So yeah, that just wanted to remind you guys about that. Let's see. I'm seeing a few people in the chat. Julian, good seeing you. Ricardo, good seeing you. Bernard. Yeah, I just want to confirm that it's good before we continue. Decide whether an article is at your level and something that you're interested in reading. How to skim and parse and look for the parts that are more important or more interesting to you. I'll let we can see in here. Cool. Thanks, guys. I'll let Andrew do more talking about the course itself since he's the one that's teaching it. So, but I do want to talk about the service he runs. So he runs a free newsletter called Slow Chinese, and there's a link in the description of the video. For those of you who have been sitting here waiting for us to start for a few minutes, you may have to refresh in order to find the link because I just added it before the stream started. But there is a link to that articles and things like that. I'll let him talk about it more. I just wanted to mention that there's a link to it in the description of this video, and there's also, he runs a paid service related to that as well, which I'll let him tell you guys about. And there's a discount code for you guys in that in the description there as well for that paid service. I highly recommend both of them. He just does a great job. I've been subscribed to the newsletter for a while now, and have really enjoyed it. So I'm going to go ahead and add Andrew and Zoe, and we're going to do a little interview, let them talk about themselves, talk about the course and the service, and then Andrew's going to do a presentation to kind of give you a taste of what the course is going to be like. So let's see. Let me add them now. We've got Andrew there, and we've got Zoe. Here we go. All right, guys. Can you hear me? Everything working well? There you go. Cool.
Yes.
All right.
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Can you move over just a little bit to
Great.
the right? There you go.
That way?
Yeah, your face was a little cut off.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
You
we
can hear
should
me,
be
but
good
you
now.
can't see me.
Cool. So, okay, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what your background in learning Chinese is? Andrew.
Sure. First of all, John, thanks for having me. Good to see you, and also good evening, good morning to everyone that's on the line. And I studied intensively for about 2 years there, and then since then I've been working based in the UK, but very much working with kind of in relation to China in a UK-based business. The newsletter is a side project. It's something I started during COVID, back in I think it was 8, and kind of keep on top of the latest slang words and new phrases, and that's basically what it does. It's something that I've done every week now for nearly 3 years. And yeah, it's slowly grown. So now the audience is around nearly 8,000 people. And yeah, I mean, I hope that it provides value in terms of helping people stay up to date and kind of on trend and engaged with what's happening in China, and particularly with the language that people are using.
Oh, very cool. So, Yeah, so you say you got into reading the news just basically as a way to keep your thumb on things, essentially, right? Like to keep your thumb on the pulse and
Yeah, so I set because I yeah, so like about a year into COVID, quickly found kind of 6 to 8 months. After 6 to 8 months, after 6 to 8 months of not going to China, I just felt that my Chinese language level was getting worse and worse, and the only thing I could do was force myself to read every day. And I realized at that time that I actually hardly ever read a full news article in Chinese from start to finish.
mm,
And so I just set myself a goal of every day, every morning, I'm gonna, no matter how long it takes, I'm gonna read at least one long form Chinese language news article every day. And so after about 6 weeks of doing that, I realized that every article I read varying degrees. Sometimes there was a lot
yeah,
that I didn't know, and then sometimes there was a lot less, but still the key bits often I didn't know. So like an idiom that makes the critical point of the whole article, or like an internet slang word or a slang word that I had not heard of, and I would miss the whole meaning of the piece because I didn't know that one word.
yeah.
And so I started just to kind of create my own document with all the words and phrases that I was learning in, and then yeah, a couple of months later, I just decided to start to every week just share what I'd learned. Um, and yeah, but the really the audience was me, and it was my.
All right, folks, I think we're back. Sorry about that. We had some stream issues. If you guys can see and hear us again, please let me know. I want to get confirmation of that before we continue. I've also reduced the stream quality, and it should that should reduce the amount of bandwidth we have to use, so that hopefully we won't keep having these issues. Okay, cool. Gary says it's now okay, which is great.
Okay.
All right, sorry about that, guys. We're back, so let's pick up where we left off. So let's see. Andrew, you were talking about how every article you read, basically, there was a ton of stuff, or at least some new stuff that you had never encountered that prevented you from understanding. And that
Yeah.
just, it reminded me, I've got a friend that's in Taiwan who's been there for 35 or 40 years. And he's a interpreter, a translator, and has been for almost the entire time he's lived there. His Chinese is outstanding, and his accent is almost native-like, or maybe native, to the point
Mm,
that a lot of Taiwanese people assume that he was born and raised there, and that he's a native.
right.
But he has this thing that he says, like, learning Chinese is like walking on the top of a mountain ridge, and you take one step off into unfamiliar territory. Like, you're on the ridge, and you understand everything, and it's great because you're doing stuff in Chinese that you're accustomed to doing and that you're accustomed to talking about. And as soon as you step off into a field that you're slightly unfamiliar with, you just fall off the cliff.
Yeah. Well, I had totally had the same feeling when I started, because before that I would use Chinese in my work, but it was very specific, very similar to what you just said actually. And I basically never read an article about what was happening in China. I would always read, business news, policy stuff, even policy documents. But I realized when I started to force myself to read every day that actually, to begin with, it was really hard. I would, there would be, over half of an article, I just wouldn't be able to get through it in one sitting. I would have to try really hard over, several sittings to get through it.
Yep.
Yeah, but through doing it every day, it's really helped me both in terms of building knowledge, but also just language in general.
Yeah, yeah. I find Chinese is just such a vocabulary heavy language that there's just so many words. And there's also like, there's so many ways of creating new words by, taking two words, two character words and deleting one character from each word, you've got a new word. And a native speaker can understand it because they're just, they're in it all the time and their levels are so much higher. But if you haven't encountered that word as a non-native speaker before, even if you know the two words it's an abbreviation of, it's like, well, what is that? And then if
Yeah.
it's pointed out that it's an abbreviation of those two words, you're like, okay, that makes sense, and you can move on. And you can develop sort of an intuition for that, but it's just, there's just so much. And yeah, specialized vocab in different fields and stuff like that. Like, I'm decent at reading paleography, but if I try to read a novel, I'm lost, because I have to look up stuff constantly, and I just never spent a whole lot of time reading novels. So yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
So
I think also just to respond to that, the advantage, and this I would be mentioning in my presentation in a second anyway, but just the great thing about news is that it's a a complete and relatively small unit. I've rarely been able to get through an entire Chinese novel, and it's always so hard.
yeah,
And I like to read before I go to sleep, and that's the exact opposite of what you should do, like challenging kind of novel type language. Whereas with the news, it's even if it is really difficult, it's still there's a beginning, a middle, and an end
mhm,
within a relatively short amount of content. And I think in terms of the biggest realization I had, so I think there are three things. One is idioms. There's always an idiom that you don't know. Second, so to your point there about abbreviations, I found one today in what we're writing about this week, 手游, which I assume is 手机 and 游戏. I'm assuming it's
oh
like
yeah,
game on the phone. I don't know, but I just guessed it as I was reading it. But
mhm,
things like that come up all the time.
yep,
And then I think the biggest thing actually is the staying current piece. Language changes so quickly, in my view, much quicker than it does in English at the
mhm,
very least. If you haven't been to China for a year or 2 years or even 6 months, you're already out of date in terms of a lot of the language that people are just using
yep,
in general life. Yeah, there's always new and interesting content to write about
yeah.
and learn.
Uh, that's interesting. Yeah, 手游. I would assume also is
Yeah.
手游戏, but interesting. So I have a question from Julian. He's asking how many characters represents a long form article for you?
Oh, so yeah, do I keep meaning to have a definition for this. Thanks for the question, Julian. I don't have a definition in terms of character count, but the way I would say it, so on desktop, a short form, normally factual news based article is pretty much like 1.5 to 2 screens worth of text. Whereas, and it's a very simple structure. So it's, this, so for example, what we're writing about this week changes in gaming, the announcement or the kind of review or proposals for policy changes in the gaming industry. So, a short form article is basically in the state media, this announcement happened, this is what this person said, this is what it means. Whereas a long form piece, you could easily have like 4 or 5 screens worth of content in terms of text. There's probably 4 or 5 subheadings. There are maybe interviews in there as well, probably a lot of images. And so it's quite hard to define a word count for that kind of article because a lot of it is actually text that's in screenshots that you also have to skim over as well.
Hmm.
So I prefer to look at it as, how much of my sidebar does it require for me to get to the end? And if the sidebar's kind of that big and I
Hmm.
have to go a long way, that's a long form. Whereas if it's kind of that big and I have to just do that, then it's short form. Not very scientific.
Well, that's and what counts as short form and long form when you're at say like an intermediate level? One of those short form articles might represent a significant challenge if you're just starting to read the news. Whereas once you're more
Yeah.
accustomed to it, that changes a bit. So
Yeah. Well, and also you can, I mean, just because let's say taking one of the articles that we might look at on the screen a bit later, one of them is really long, but it's written in a way where you can break it down into much more manageable chunks and treat each part almost as a standalone news piece in itself. So I really believe that there's so much content and opportunity to read interesting stuff, and with some of the tactics that we teach in the course, actually something that looks like it's way above your level is actually doable with, if you take the right approach rather than just kind of diving in character by character and getting lost.
yeah, yeah, it's the old how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? Cool. So Zoe, can you tell us about yourself and what you do with Slow Chinese and your background and all that?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me here, John. And hello, everyone. I'm Zoe. I'm the editor of Slow Chinese. And I'm a native speaker of Chinese, as you can probably tell, which means I don't need to study Chinese, but I have to learn Chinese in a sense. Yeah. And I'm also a professional conference interpreter. So my role in Slow Chinese that I edit the newsletter, the free version and the paid version, and I also do the podcast for the paid version. So if you are a paid subscriber, you probably recognize my voice, even though I mainly speak Chinese in the podcast. Yes.
Oh, very cool. So can you guys talk a bit about what Slow Chinese is? I'm sure I didn't do it justice. So yeah, what it is
Sure.
and the difference
Um,
between the free and paid and what people can expect.
okay. So I'll start, and then Zoe, maybe you feel free to add. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really simple thing, actually. We take one news story every week that we know people in China are talking about online, offline. It's normally something that's, you know, on the news agenda that week, or it could be something that is like a bigger trending topic that is relevant, and something is going on in China that means people are talking about it again. So, for example, that kind of thing would be, high unemployment within kind of younger age bracket. It may be consumer trends that are ongoing, but there's something in the news about it. But every week we just take one story, and then every week I set myself a challenge of, once we've decided on what the story is, uh, finding around 5 articles in Chinese that are discussing that news story. Read all of them, um, gather all the language that is in there that I think is interesting. So it's idiomatic, it's new, or like trending topics. It's difficult, or it's really relevant and quite specific to that particular sector. I try and tie things around a theme. So, for example, if we're looking at a story about the stock markets, then we would look at words and phrases all linked to that kind of theme and context, because it just helps consolidate that. And then we explain the context in English, which is really important. One of the biggest challenges of reading the news in Chinese is you're starting from you're not starting on the start line. When you're going into reading a piece, you're way behind because you have no context. So we do the heavy lifting in terms of learning about the context and reading about it, explain it in English, and then we choose 5 words. I call them the favorite 5, and those are either the most interesting, the most relevant, or the most on trend and useful to show off with. So we take 5 of those, and then I then go in and explain about another 20 or so words or phrases, split into useful words, 3-character phrases, idioms, and then colloquialisms. So the free version looks like that. We take a story, we explain what it is, we explain 5 words and phrases with translations and example sentences, and then the rest of the kind of interesting language that we find. And it's mostly in English, and then we've got Chinese example sentences, and then translations. The paid version is we take that free content and turn it into a language learning resource. So you get, as Zoe mentioned, you get audio, get a podcast. The Chinese part of that also has a transcript, in Chinese, a Chinese transcript, which is downloadable. We, out of the 5 or 6 articles that we review to put it together, we choose the best one. And then Zoe also does the audio of that. So the idea with both the podcast and the audio is that it's multi sensory, if that's the right word. So you can listen and also read the same content, because that just helps with the consolidation. And then that's the, there's that side of the paid version in terms of extra resources. We then have integrations with Hack Chinese, Pleco, and Scritter. And then we also have downloadable documents of the word list and also the example sentences with the Chinese and the pinyin. You can't fit all that in one newsletter, so we do that as a separate download. So it's basically, you get the same content, but we do a lot more hard work for you, and then you get a load of resources that you can use. And one of the principles behind it is maximum flexibility. So we provide way more than anyone would, any human would want to consume in 1 week, unless they have an extremely high pain threshold. But some people don't read the newsletter at all; they just listen to the podcast. Some people download the Pleco and then read the newsletter. Some people print the thing out. Some people even print the newsletter out and handwrite the words. So we've tried to cover as many different learning styles as possible, and then hopefully that caters for the maximum variety as possible, because that's something else that as a language learner, and also as someone that's generally been self-taught and self-driven through the process, is that I always found the way that we were being taught in textbooks or grammar books or whatever, dictionaries even, it's just really rigid, and I've never been able to get on with that approach. I always like to do it my way, and so I guess the newsletter really is kind of the way I learn, but then offering as much flexibility as possible.
That's great. So can you talk about the integration with those apps that you mentioned? Like, what I assume it adds to your flashcard deck or whatever?
Yeah, so with Pleco, Hack, Chinese, and Scritter, we at the end of every paid newsletter, so it's delivered by a newsletter, by email, and at the end, on the paid version, you get a bunch of extra resources. So the podcast is in there, downloads, and then the integration. So it's just a link. You click the link, and then you automatically download the flashcards into that app, one of the 3. So Pleco, Hack Chinese, and Scritter.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. We're big fans of all 3 of those apps. So that's
and it's amazing. Most people use Pleco, but some people love to use Scritter. Some people use Hack Chinese but don't use Pleco. So it's again, it's just trying to offer as much flexibility as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we have a couple questions here in the chat. One is, do you have a version of this newsletter that features news topics from Taiwan?
Okay, so that is a question. You're not the first person to ask that, Wendy, so thank you for the reminder. So I did the majority of my foundational learning of Chinese in Taiwan. So I started with traditional characters. So I really should. The answer to that question should be yes. Unfortunately, it's not yes yet. And that's purely because, number one, I have got a bit lazy, mostly reading simplified characters. And so it does take a little bit of pushing me to get back into reading traditional characters. And then also, just the volume of content that's available for the mainland is so much. And I've just got in a system of knowing where to look, and I haven't really been able to tune into, the equivalent channels in Taiwan. Although I'd really love to. So if Wendy, if you have any recommendations, then please do share. For example, one thing will be great to look at, in the build up to the elections there, and how that's being discussed. But as yet, I unfortunately haven't done too much of Taiwan-based news, but I would love to.
To add on to that a little bit, I've gotten several people have emailed me asking if the Chinese News Bootcamp is going to feature anything in traditional characters. And so what I've told them is that we'll make the articles available in both, but it's probably mostly going to come from mainland news sources.
Yeah. So but I have made a mental note and set myself a goal of ensuring that we do that. So in we have a whole database full of recommended media resources that we use, and we do have Taiwan-based media outlets in there. So we can definitely look at, for example, Commonwealth magazine is one that we refer to quite a bit. So we'll definitely use Taiwan or traditional character articles, both Taiwan-based, and also we can look elsewhere as well. There are other media outlets that do traditional character. So we'll definitely do that.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds great. And Wendy also asked, does anyone use Anki, and do you have any plans to integrate with Anki?
Yeah, so Wendy's she's very good at getting the questions that I can't say yes to yet. So that's also on my list. We don't have an integration with Anki yet. I know Zoe uses Anki. I don't really use it, but yeah, that's something else that I really want to do as well. So thank you, Wendy. You've moved that back up towards the top of the list again.
And one more from Julian, and then I think after that we'll probably let you go ahead and start your
Sure.
presentation. So, and folks,
Okay.
any other questions that you guys type into the chat, we'll do a little Q&A session toward the end of the live stream. So, feel free to ask anything, and then we'll come back to the questions later. But Julian says, can you tell a bit more about the new intermediary level content you added recently to the paid newsletter?
Sure. Julian, thank you. That's a much easier question to answer. Thank you. So we did that because one of our students, very engaged and a kind of ambitious, a very helpful student, asked if we could do it. So with her, we worked out how that could work. And again, it was on my list for quite a long time in wanting to do that, because I know from first-hand experience that some weeks you just don't have enough time to read through a huge long kind of native Chinese language article, but you do want to practice. So we started that in September, and the aim is for it to be 300 to 400 characters long, and it's pitched at, I would say, upper intermediate summary of the news piece that we read every week. And so therefore you get, it's funny, thank you for the reminder, June. I didn't mention this at all, but that's like a whole extra bit that's attached. So you've got the advanced content that's there if you want to put yourself through that. And then the intermediate, so is much shorter, simpler, a less advanced word list, but we try and use some of the advanced words and phrases in there. There's also audio as well. So you get audio of the article and the word list, and then we also have grammar exercises as well. And we're now building out, which I'm hoping that we can share in this course actually, a kind of like a repository of all the various grammar structures and conjunctions and stuff. That's a bit more of a structured approach for those that want to just need a little bit more structure in terms of how they consume the content every week.
Oh, man, that I didn't realize that the paid service offered that as well. So okay, I'm going to do a little plug real quick because I'm just so impressed with what you guys have made. So folks, if you're at an intermediate level or above, it's just a no-brainer. And even the annual price of the paid service is really approachable. So for the amount of stuff that you get and the quality of it, they really do a great job. So highly recommend going and checking it out. Start with the free service if you want to, but definitely the paid service is just, there's so much there.
Thanks, John. That's very kind of you.
So, okay, I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and let you guys take over. Zoe, I know you're going to be controlling the slides while Andrew talks, and I'm just going to kind of sit back. And if you need me to do anything, if you need me to change scenes or anything like that, let me know. I'll take care of it on my end. I'll just kind of let you guys do your thing until you're.
If you could tidy my office up and through some technology, that would be good. But otherwise, I don't
I'll
think
see. I'll see what I can do.
change the
Yeah.
system.
All right. Cool. Zoe, yeah, if you can go ahead and start sharing your screen. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, I think it works. Does it
Okay.
work?
I don't
Can you
see.
see it?
I'm
No,
not seeing.
can't see it yet.
Okay, I'll do that again.
Oh, she
Oh,
left. I'm sure she'll be right back. So there she is.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, let me try that again. Can you see that? I don't.
I'm not seeing it. Maybe if I remove myself.
Yeah, I think you should do it
Oh,
because
yeah, that's a good idea.
Let me do that. Let's
yeah.
see. We'll do that and we'll do this. All right, try again.
Or maybe if you remove me.
Possibly. Oh, she left again. Okay, maybe I should just do the slides. It worked while we were testing, but
It did, yeah.
yeah. Fortunately, I have the slides here, so. Here's Zoe again. All right, Zoe, you're back on.
Yes, I'm back on.
It doesn't seem to be working, so why
Do you,
don't we,
yeah, would you like to share instead?
yeah, I'll do that. So you guys just tell me when you want me to change slides, and
Sure.
otherwise, you do your thing. So let me pull that up real quick. There we go.
Great.
That's all you.
Okay. Shall I start?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So, right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you and also to share what we have in this course with you. So, the background to this is that in the last 2 years, we've done a course within the Slow Chinese audience, and the most recent one we did in October last year, and it was called the Mandarin News Mastery System. I basically package the process that I use every week to find, consume, package, understand the news that I'm reading every week for the newsletter. I took that system and turned it into a long checklist because I realized that actually every week I was overcoming the problems that any learner of Chinese would have, but I was just doing it in a very intense and also quite quick way because I have this continuous pressure of a deadline every Saturday when we publish. And so that was the beginning of it, and we did a course in 2022. Again, an updated and upgraded version of 2023 in 2023, and so this is an iteration of that, but with taking a more foundational approach. So I would say it's aimed at, whereas the course we did last year, the Mandarin News Mastery System, is definitely more pitched at more of the advanced level in terms of language ability. This is, I don't like to say beginner, because I think to be good enough to access Chinese language news, you do have to be pretty good, decent language ability. So, but it's kind of the rudiments or the basics that you need. It's kind of like an entry level course to help someone that's kind of at the intermediate level of Chinese access real life news content and get away from what I personally find extremely boring. The standard content that you might be reading. It might be graded readers. It might be the latest news update in China Daily or something like that, which obviously everyone has to do that part in language learning, but I think there's just so much opportunity in real life, well-written news content. And so the purpose of this course is really to help students at a slightly more of an intermediate level access some of the tactics and some of the methodologies that we use. So that's the background of how we came to do this. And obviously we've been discussing with John now for 6 months or so.
Yep.
So it's been in the pipeline for a while, and I hope that it can. I suppose my hope is that it can bring you a little bit of motivation and inspiration through accessing stuff that looks like and feels like it should be way above your level, but actually, it is accessible with the right approach. Could I have the next slide, please, John? Okay, so this is going to be a short overview. We've covered some stuff already. So introduction, I think we've already covered. I mean, the introduction is basically Zoe and I and what we're trying to do with the course. I will give a quick outline of the modules. I've got some actionable tips at the end. I always like to have some actionable, valuable recommendations in anything we do, and then a Q&A if there's anything that you would like to ask that we haven't covered in the presentation part. Next slide, please. And again. Okay, right. So as I said, the overriding goal here is that I've tried to package and explain as much of the process that I use every week to write the newsletter. So I hope that it is something that you or anyone can apply to help you access better and interesting content as a language learner. Because let's face it, learning Chinese can be a lonely and depressing experience more often than not sometimes. And so I hope that through doing this, I can help as many people as possible feel good about learning Chinese, particularly using the news to do that. Next slide. Okay, so there are 3 problems we're trying to solve in this course. The first is finding good content. The second is accelerating reading speed. The third is enhancing your comprehension. And these quotes that you see on the screen there, these are real quotes from students that we've worked with in our courses, and this is where they were at the start. I'd like to think that by the time we got to the end, they had less of this kind of pain and more of a feeling of accomplishment. But the kind of emotions that are captured or that are a part of this kind of intermediate plateau are struggling, bored, wanting to give up. So, and a lot of that is not because of ability, it's because of the approach. And we'll come on to the unique challenges part in the course, but finding good content on its own is a really big challenge. And so that's a really key part. When you've got something that is trusted, good quality, suited to your level, and also you're interested in it, then it makes everything else so much easier. So a big part of it is finding the content. And then the key part in terms of the methodology is all about how you can accelerate your reading speed and enhance comprehension through being a bit more strategic about how you consume the content. So not just kind of wading through everything character by character, line by line. There's a lot that you can do that removes a lot of the barriers and the friction points. So that's what we're trying to achieve. Next slide. Okay, we've talked about myself and Zoe, so we don't need to do that. Next slide. Okay, so the course is over a 5-week period. There's a live module each week. The first module, we talk about basically, why it's important but hard. I've just covered some of that. We go into where you find good content. We define in week 3 what is Chinese news speak, and there's a lot of content in that presentation. We then go into how you, with an understanding of newspeak and how the articles are structured, how do you actually then go and read through it and consume the content. And then finally, we'll do lots of examples in the final presentation and show how that's implemented. There will be examples in every presentation. But we'll also have a session at the end, which I'm hoping will be not only things that I bring to you, but also you can bring to us as well, in terms of looking at how the system actually really does work. Next slide. Okay, so as I said, it's 5 live sessions. We have 5 Q&A sessions also, which are also live, and obviously there are recordings available for each of them. The format is very much like this, so it's there'll be a structured presentation part to the main modules. There's always a Q&A. There will always be some homework. The homework is manageable, so I would say, depending on what your bandwidth is for work, you can do as much or as little as you want. But essentially, at the end of each session, we take what we've explained, and then it's over to you to apply that. So, for example, in the first one, it will be deciding or looking for, based on our recommendations, what outlets are worth you looking at and trying to find which ones are best suited for you, finding an article in there and test it, it's that kind of stuff. So at the end of each session, it's implementing what we've taught you. And then by the time we get to the end, you've, in theory, got all the component parts to then put the whole system into action. So build the system, implement it. Obviously, there's the community element, which we've done in our courses previously. And as I understand it, we do in outlier courses, we use the platform. I'm not so familiar with it yet, Thinkific, but there is, albeit also available on the platform as you would expect in an outlier course. And then also there are some resources that we'll be sharing within the course as well. So checklists, recommended reading, and then also, as I said earlier, I'm putting together a kind of a repository of grammar structures as well, which will hopefully be helpful. Next slide. Right, so that's the overview. I'll just go into a little bit more detail in each session. So yeah, we've got a little bit of time left. So if we go to the next slide, please, John. Right, so module 1. So the question we ask is, why is reading the news important? And there's all the obvious answers to that question. But for me, in terms of language learning, there are two bits that I think are really crucial. One is about language, but the other is about knowledge. The language piece is that I would describe it as the metabolism of Chinese changes so much. And it is, as John was saying earlier, the breadth of vocab and depth is so much that you can never learn it all. Certainly not in a textbook, and actually not in a dictionary either, because there's so much new stuff coming through all the time. And so part of it is, just building an understanding of, the knowledge base of the language. Also, the context piece is really important. We talk about that quite a lot. So the approach we use in the newsletter is all about context. So using context as a tool to enhance your learning experience and outcome. We obviously talk about the challenges. I think probably two of the biggest challenges, very unique to Chinese. One is the fact that it's the context-based language, which both it means that you need to understand a lot more stuff to understand what's being said, but then also it's the stuff that isn't said in a context-based language, which is also really difficult to understand. And so, that is one key challenge. The other one, particularly when reading news content, of course, is censorship, which is very unique to, not unique just to China, but certainly it's a big part of it's a big factor of the learning and the process of consuming news-based content in Chinese, and just understanding that is really important, and understanding what is censored, what isn't censored, where do you find what you want, all that kind of stuff. We talk about that quite a lot. And yeah, I've already covered the benefits piece. So for me, the main benefit is, to be honest, there's nothing quite like that feeling when you've got a word or a phrase that's literally hot and just being kind of come into use in China, and you manage to drop it into a conversation in Chinese with someone you're talking to, and like they are so impressed. That's part of what I want to do through the newsletter, is that I want to be on top of as much of the latest language as possible and be able to show off as much as possible, because that's also a really great feeling and a kind of self-motivation. So a lot of the benefits actually are just giving you more confidence in language use, both in terms of reading it and then also hopefully using it in a kind of more of a speaking context as well. Module 2, please. Okay, so where to find the content. So the Mandarin News Mastery system, we do this in much more depth. So we go into less depth on this one, but that we're just going to make some really specific recommendations to you in terms of what's good, what isn't good. Obviously, it's down to you in terms of what you want to read. But also, there's a really important part in this module, which is defining what the differences are linguistically between Chinese language and English language. In the original copy of the course, the first bullet was differences between Chinese and English news. But actually, for me, I think that is not an accurate way to put it. It's really the how the languages vary, and therefore how that then impacts on how you consume. So, probably the most obvious one is what's called information focus. So generally the focus of information, i.e. the important point in Chinese, generally is right at the end. And then the first half to 3/4 is in a topic comment language structure, which is another big difference. It's the context or it's the background. So it's this circular thing, and gradually you're going closer and closer to the point, which is kind of in the middle, or I suppose at the end. And so one of the key recommendations we make, and we'll demonstrate it hopefully if we have time, is when you're reading Chinese news, you start at the end, so you know where you're going and what the point is. So we talk about quite a lot about the differences. Obviously then the types of articles and the types of writing. I think it was Julian that asked about the length of long form in terms of character count. So, one type of article is long form, and we look at what that actually is, and then the different types of long form and short form content, on the mainland, off the mainland, state, non-state, a little bit of social media, but not too much. So we're giving you not only an overview of where to find content, but also then the tools that are more relevant to the next two modules as well. So John, if you could go to module 3. Thank you. So in the original course copy, this was called the architecture of Chinese language news. I think it's best it's a more relatable way to put it is, what is Chinese Newspeak? So there's a load of content in here. We look at the overall structure, which you might say is kind of obvious because pretty much, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. But actually there are elements within any news article or any particular type of news article that if you don't know it, so it can be a barrier to entry. So for example, some long form pieces have like a summary piece at the start, or they have a quote, or some kind of background piece that you're going into, and then you kind of get lost in that, and then you realize it repeats itself further down the page. So why don't you just skip that bit and go into the main bit? So just stuff like that. It's just giving you pointers in terms of what the overall structure is. I call them newsy characters. I'm sure there's a more linguistically correct way to put it, but there are literally a handful of characters that if you know them and you know to look for them, then it can dramatically increase your two things, your reading speed and your level of comprehension, because you can use them as signposts through the article, and which enables you to understand the structure, where you're going. Obviously, we've started at the end anyway, and then it gives you these signposts through the article and through the experience to make it easy. So we talk about that quite a lot. Punctuation is really important. We talk about that. That might be in the next module, actually. I'll just double check when we get there. And then, of course, naming and proper nouns. So one of the biggest challenges in reading Chinese news is not only names and proper nouns in Chinese, but even worse is names and proper nouns that are transliterated from foreign language, like non-Chinese languages. And so we look at, again, some of the conventions and common characters that are in there. Now, this is not a course teaching you Chinese characters, but it is a course that teaches you how you identify what I would describe as high leverage elements of a news article. So, a handful of conjunctive single characters, a handful of characters found in names and proper nouns that you can look for proactively, and then you can use that as a tool rather than it be something that gets in your way and you get lost at. So there's a lot of content in there in terms of what the structure of articles, how we look at titles and headings, and then these high leverage characters that can be your friends rather than your enemy when you're trying to read a Chinese language news article. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, grammar structures. I said punctuation. It was in the previous present module, but I put it in here because I think it makes more sense. So for me, maybe this is not the case if you've learnt more formally or in a structured way through university or on courses or whatever. But I find that the subtle differences with punctuation in Chinese, especially speech marks, are a really critical tool that you can use to accelerate your reading speed and enhance your comprehension. So we look at punctuation. Long sentences, that must be one of the most painful experiences. I was looking at one today in this week's newsletter about the Chinese gaming industry, and I was halfway through a sentence and I looked at it and I thought, I'm not even a third of the way through this paragraph, and the whole paragraph is one sentence. And so we talk about long sentences and how to cope with them, how to deal with them and break them down. And then my favorite part, and John flagged this at the start, is skim reading. So this is the bit of the system. I've taken, it's basically a handful of the tactics that we teach in the Mandarin News Mastery system, and we put them in here. And they are the highest leverage things that you can use to break an article down, get your signposts in place, and then use them to then read in a much more effective and efficient way. So that's we talk about skim reading a little bit in this module as well. And then finally, John, next slide. Great. And then the last one will be implementation. So as I said earlier, through each module, the way we do it is the presentation will probably take 20 to 30 minutes, kind of like this presentation now. And then I'll do a load of examples. And normally the way we've done it in the past, which I really like, is I share the examples that we're using in the newsletter every week. So it's relevant and current content, and it actually shows the system in action. And I'm amazed that it really works. Every week I use it, and when we do these live sessions and use what we're writing about as the examples, it still works every week. And so that's what we'll do anyway on through the previous 4 modules, particularly modules 2, 3, and 4, and then in module 5, through that process, or by the time we get to module 5, through the process, you will have worked out where you're going to focus your energy in terms of sourcing your content. You've picked out the kind of article that you're looking for. You've got an idea of the kind of theme that you're most interested in, and you've got a bunch of articles that you're working through. We'll workshop those in this session, as well as having examples that we prepare as well. Now, my preference is I never really use or look at state media because I read it purely for pleasure and for the newsletter. And reading state media is, when I say state, I mean state-owned media on mainland China. That is not an enjoyable experience for me, and I never use it. But I know that some of us on the line may have to use it in a work context, research or whatever. So we will look at state media as well as non-state. But just to flag that my preference is always to go for non-state media. We'll look at a range of politics, business, society, and politics in terms of the themes we look at. Probably my preference is we tend to look at society and business more. But again, it depends on the interest of those of us in the course. We will look at whatever you want us to look at. And actually, there is an onboarding questionnaire that hopefully, John, you can include in the pre-course emails. We really encourage you to fill that out, because we can, these courses are always iterative. And the more direction you can give us in terms of what you're looking for, what you're interested in, what you already use in terms of news content, then that gives us more direction as well. So we'll basically be guided by you in terms of what you want to learn. But we'll try and pretty much cover a wider spectrum as possible. Next. Okay, actions. I've got 3 do's and I've got 3 don'ts, and this is where I'll leave it. Okay, so if you ask someone, a learner of Mandarin, what do they read in terms of news content to practice their Chinese, I found that more often than not, it is really, China Daily, People's Daily, Xinhua, Zhongxin She, or whatever, the state media outlets, or they read New York Times Chinese, BBC Chinese, FT Chinese, or one of the other international media outlets that have a Chinese publication. My strong recommendation is don't use any of those if you want to use news content as a language learning tool and resource. Nobody in China talks like the language in China Daily or People's Daily, unless you're a party official. And if that's your ambition to talk like that, then obviously you should read China Daily and People's Daily and what have you. But there is a lot of content out there that is written as people speak, and we can come on to recommended resources in the course. So, number 1, don't read Chinese state-owned media. Number 2, don't read Chinese publications Chinese language versions of international publications. The reason for that second recommendation is that generally they're translations, and you're reading something that's a translation. It's a terrible way to learn Chinese because it's the logic, the thinking, the cultural context, the structure is English, even if it's a great translation. And so generally we advise not to use those as resources. Now, if it's original content, and again, in the course we'll come on to how you identify that, but it's not good. It's not good content for language learning. Finally, graded readers. I have nothing against graded readers. They're fantastic and absolutely necessary as you progress through your levels of ability. But I hope that by now, you're a few years into learning Chinese. Keep your graded readers on the shelf for now. And then through this course, I hope that you can, park those for a bit, and then we can find some interesting and engaging content that's relevant and current. So those are the don'ts. The do's are select one media outlet. You may, if you want to ask in the Q&A, I can give you some recommendations now. You have a look, and you can. The key thing to the whole process is scan before you read, and the secret weapon in the scanning process is Control or Command if you use Apple F, and you can search for things. For example, names. If you spot a name early on in a news article, you can quickly search for it. There's a handful of grammatical characters that you can search for to get structure. And most importantly, start from the end. So if you want to go ahead and look for an article, my advice to make it 10 times easier before you've even done the course is start at the end, start at the end, last paragraph, go to the first paragraph, look for names or proper nouns or whatever, Control F to search through the document, identify where they are, and then look at the titles and the subheadings, understand all those, and then you've basically prepped the page to then go into reading the article. So if you just do those 3 things, if you don't go ahead and do the course, but if you just take those 3 things, then I can guarantee you that your ability to get through a news article will be much easier than it currently is. So just to recap, start at the end, read that paragraph first, read the first paragraph second, then the heading and the subheadings, and then Control F to pick out some keywords. And then finally, it's the Q&A. I've finished my presentation.
Cool. All right, so we do have some questions in the chat, so let me and guys, if you have any more questions, please feel free to type them in there. Let's see. Might have missed.
Was that clear?
Oh yeah, it was great. I mean, it was interesting, hearing your comments on the New York Times and things like that. I had the same impression. The first time I read it, it was like, this is just English with Chinese characters. I mean, it's And sometimes the translation can be quite good, but it's still, like you said, it's
Yeah,
English logic, it's an English way of organizing the article. But
yeah,
a lot of times, what we called it, I took some interpretation courses when I was in Taiwan, and we called it translatese, which
right,
happens a lot, where it's like, I noticed it, the first time I ever noticed it, I was reading Harry Potter in Chinese.
yeah.
And it was every sentence I read, it was like, I guarantee I could translate this back to English, and it would almost be word for word what it is in the original, because it was so transparently like almost a word for word translation.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And the thing is, it's quite appealing. So I mean, the good thing about New York Times is that Chinese is that it has the Chinese and English on the same screen, so you can cross-reference. That's really helpful.
yeah,
But in terms of reading into a Chinese kind of proper news piece, it's just not that.
yeah, yeah,
So it's
yeah. It's got its place, but really the focus should be
yeah,
on natively written content, because that's just going to
yeah,
make a huge difference to your learning. So. Um,
yeah,
I do have a question from Claudia. Hi, everybody. I might have missed
yeah.
what you said, Andrew and Zoe, but do you work in tandem when you're not sure of the meaning of your translation into English?
Okay, so I'll just explain the process, and then hopefully that will answer the question. So a lot of the so we start. It's always starting in Chinese, and then I will do like a first round translation and full first draft newsletter. So that would be English introduction and context, a list of words, and with translations, and then I would then hand over to Zoe to correct all the awful mistakes and make it into something that's coherent. And then in that process, so the biggest challenge for me is understanding the context. And that there's two parts to that. So the background of the story. So for example, the one we're doing this week, the gaming industry one. I know most of the companies in there, but often there are new companies, there are people that I haven't heard of, government departments. There's these long policy document names, which, I get to that, whatever it was, Zhengai, whatever, 意见. This is a really long thing. 征询意见稿. Yeah. My eyes just glaze over when I see that. But the problem with doing that is you then kind of miss the bit after as well. And so it's that kind of stuff that I find really hard. And that's where Zoe comes in to help with the context piece. So it starts, to answer your question, it starts with Chinese, goes into English, and then the discussion part and the understanding the bit, I would say mostly happens in English.
That's interesting. It reminds me of, I've told a story a million times on our live streams and stuff, that one of the things that helped my Chinese the most was going through a movie. It was a Taiwanese movie called 那些年我们一起追的女孩. And it's like, it's a goofy comedy, like people called it the American Pie of Taiwan at the time, which it wasn't as raunchy as
Right.
American Pie, but anyway, I've talked about it a lot. And I remember there was a specific line in there where the guy said something, and there were a few characters that I was just like, what does this mean? Like, I can't even figure out what it could possibly mean. And so I asked my language exchange partner, who was also a conference interpreter, which, quick plug for conference interpreters. They're the best language partners you can possibly have, because the sensitivity to language use and things is so much higher than most
Yeah.
people, that it's really helpful. But yeah, so I asked her about the characters, and it was like, oh, that was a TV show back in the 80s. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, well, there's no way I could
Yeah.
have
Yeah. That
found
happens all
that.
the time. That
And
happens all the time. And often
even through Googling, I couldn't
in
find anything. So,
yeah. And so, often in a news article, particularly these long form ones, you'll have these oblique references to a drama series that everyone in China is, of a certain kind of age will have heard of. But I've never heard of that. And that kind of legwork takes a lot of time to look up. So that's where Zoe helps in terms of filling in the background
yeah,
and the
yeah.
context.
And then things like outdated slang and things like that too, like where you're not really going to be able to find it, but people who are around when it was
Yeah.
when it was popular, they'll know it, you know. There was one in
Yeah.
Japan recently that somebody said choberigu, which is like cho is like chow, like chaoji, right? So extremely. And then berigu is an abbreviation of very good. So it's like super very good. But this was popular, I think, like in the 90s or something. And it's one
Yeah.
of those things that, like, a lot of course, native speakers know it, but most non-natives that live there have no idea. And
Yeah.
I, like, someone taught it to me, and I said it in a bar, and everyone just, like, died laughing. But that's
Yeah.
the sort of thing you're not going to, like, you're probably not going to Google it and find it, you know, because it's just
Yeah.
dated. It had a little 2 years of popularity or something like that, and nobody uses it anymore. So,
Yeah. You get that a lot in Chinese too. So what the one that stands out that comes to mind is YYDS,
uh-huh,
永远的神. So that was really popular for about 6 months, a year or more ago,
uh-huh.
and then it suddenly became really unpopular. So if you used it, it was like a really uncool thing to say. So, you can be really on message one time,
Yeah.
then you go back 6 months later, use the same thing, and within such a short time, it's not only not on message anymore, but it's like a really like rubbish thing to say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
I've run into that in Taiwan. I'm trying to remember. I was there for a conference in August, I think it was, and I said something that was cool when I lived there 10 years ago. I don't remember what it was at this point, but I said something and people were like, "Hmm? Like, you still say that?" That's part of it, part of being a non-native and not living there. So
yeah.
let's see. Okay, so
Any more questions?
question, but I think you answered it during your presentation, and he actually
Okay.
ended up signing up for the course, so that's awesome.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well done, Julian.
Wendy also asks, would love to hear your suggestions for choosing a media outlet.
Okay, so Wendy, give me some just in the chat box there. If you could say what kind of stuff you're looking for, in terms of theme or topic. Broad. Are we looking at business, social media trends, social changes, international? What are you interested in?
Cool. Yeah, we'll give her a minute to type that into the chat, and we'll
Okay,
have a couple other questions and then come back to you.
sure.
Let's see. Gary says, please give us some online media that we can access. So maybe
Okay, same question.
questions, yeah.
Yeah, so Zoe can add into this. So depending on what you're looking for, but when I'm looking for good business stories, business like kind of up to date business news, one of the best sites that I like is 36KR, 36K. It's 36kr.com. I think that's owned by Alibaba. Is it? I think it is.
I'm not too sure, but I wouldn't
Yeah,
be
I think it is.
surprised.
Yeah, it's owned by, I think it's owned by one of the big internet companies. So that is business news, entrepreneur news, lots of youth topics. That's a really good one. Huxiu, huxiu.com is one that Zoe often recommends. That's more society-based type stuff, but again, they have lots of business and youth topics. They're on Singapore. There's quite a good one. 联合早报 is a good one for China topics that are maybe censored or controlled in China. That's quite good. The Initi, I always get the name wrong. 端传媒 is a
Yeah.
good, but there's a paywall one. That's a good one, but it's paywalled. We're looking at a Duan article this week. So I'll just give you the. Let me see.
Can
So
you
Duan 传媒.
can you type some of these into
Should I
the
put?
chat, one of you guys, and then I can
Yeah.
post it into the
Can you do
conference
that,
call?
Zoe? Sure. Okay. Are you okay to do that, Zoe?
I can't share at the moment, so I guess
Okay. All
I
right.
have to share it.
Let me. I will copy into the chat now. So this is the. Okay. Here we go. Send message. I don't know if everyone can see that.
They can't, but
This
I'll
one,
put
36.
say into the chat.
Okay.
So the one you're
right.
typing into is a private chat between me, you, and Zoe.
Okay.
I'll paste it into the main chat for them.
Yeah. Okay. So those are the ones that come to mind. If you're on WeChat, there is literally an endless supply of really good content, and so depending on what you're looking for, I could make some specific recommendations. There's so business wise, 创业班 is a good one. I think it's probably best if I provide the ID. I can send the IDs on email to you, John, and then you can circulate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can share a few on email. My preference is to mix. So mainland media sources, I would generally look at WeChat public accounts, 公众号, so that they're kind of media. It's like media platforms within WeChat. They're always there's a lot of content in there. So that's where I would look for on mainland content. Off mainland, I would go to 联合早报 in Singapore, 端传媒, also Singapore based. Taiwan, there's Commonwealth 天下, which is Commonwealth magazine. Yeah. So those are my initial recommendations. But the WeChat public accounts, there are so many in there, and we're always finding new ones as well. So it's so for example, there's some really great ones. If you're into like youth topics and consumer stuff, there's loads of good ones in there. Yeah, we're finding new ones all the time. Let me just, if you've got a minute. So DT is a good one. DT 财经 is a good one. That's kind of youth and consumery type topics. Good business one is 中国企业家杂志, China Entrepreneur Magazine. Very good. I'll put these in an email to you, John. You can.
Okay.
Circulate.
Yeah, when you send those, I'll paste it into the description of this video. So folks, if you come back,
Sure.
it'll be there. I'll also,
Okay.
I'm going to send out an email later this week.
To
point people toward the recording of this live stream so they can come watch it, and I'll also mention them. So,
yeah.
Cool.
Okay, but hopefully that will help.
Yeah, so Wendy came back and she said she's interested in popular news, celebrities, and entertainment.
Okay, all right. I'll put some into the email. So in terms of mainstream Chinese media, I mean they're all pretty much the same. So Xinlang, Sina, 网易, 163.com, and then also Sohu.com. They're all pretty much the same, but I would always go for 163.com is the one that's better. But I generally don't go and access news from those sites. So the way I would do that is I would either search for key terms in WeChat public accounts, or I would Google the thing that I'm looking for. So let's say, Wendy, to your thing there, so a particular celebrity news, let's say, or like social media story, and then I would add 163 to the search terms. And then it's much easier way to find the content about that particular story on that news portal.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's loads of good entertainment ones. So another good one for general like society, culture and stuff, like kind of cultural kind of trends and stuff. 三联生活周刊 is a good one. Life Week, that has its own site. And it's also on WeChat as well. That has the content on that is very like there's lots of content, multiple articles published every day. I've got a couple of entertainment ones here that I can put in the 后浪研究所 is also a really good one for social media trending type topics, youth and that kind of thing. Yeah, okay, those are the ones that come to mind for now.
Cool. Yeah, thanks very much. And yeah, when you send those, I'll make sure they get sent out to people. Sorry, I just had a bit of a coughing fit.
Oh dear, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Okay, let's see. We have another question from Claudia. Will there be a way to sometimes discuss syntactical issues trilingually? Chinese, English, and French, for example. And she clarified Chinese is a so-called distant language, English a Germanic language, and French a Romance language. I'll let you answer that.
Okay, so my French is awful, so I definitely couldn't do that. Um, so I think the answer to that question is probably no. However, um, we could look at things about French topics in Chinese if that could help.
Yeah.
Um, Zoe is a conference interpreter, speaks German, English, and Chinese. So if the language was German, then maybe. But Zoe, how is your French?
Je ne parle pas français.
Yeah, there you
Yeah, that's about the extent of my French too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's interesting. But I think there will be a few French speakers in the course, from what I
go. Okay,
remember. So maybe they can form like a little study group in the community and discuss
that's
that
a good idea.
themselves. And yeah,
Yeah,
that's one great thing about the community function is that it's basically like a discussion board. But
yeah,
I can make a separate like sub forum for any topic that people want. So like the community is theirs to mold in the way that they want to. So if there's a group of French speakers that want to, make
great,
a little
good idea.
sub forum for that, I'm happy to do that. So
Okay.
or any other language as well. Um, let's see. Anthony asks, do you sometimes cover news about environmental issues, green business, climate, biodiversity, etc.? That may be
Um,
our newsletter particularly.
yeah, it's good. Thank you, Anthony, for the question. So green business, I would say the most popular topic we look at is we've looked at generally business related. So solar industry, renewable industry in general, EV car companies are always great content. Not really done much on environment, although I love that as a topic to read about. So if you're interested in that, we can, in terms of what we look at during the course, we can add that in, no problem.
Cool. We have a question from Bernard. Interested in finding out more about Chinese politics. I find PD, etc., completely indigestible. Is there anything better?
Yeah. So again, you can. So if you want to, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but quite a good resource that is a bit more digestible is Hu Xijin, the former editor of the Global Times, who's very active on obviously on Weibo, also on Twitter, and he also has his own WeChat public account channel as well. And so, I don't read that for to source my information particularly, but it is kind of political type language, but in a much more digestible way. And there are loads of WeChat. So, for example, there's a couple of good WeChat accounts. Zheng Shi is a good one, which is all about the latest corrupt officials that are going down. That also talks about policy and international affairs. Chang'anjie Zhishi is also another good one, similar kind of topic. So, kind of political stories and content, also international geopolitical things. I tend to steer a little bit away from them because it is quite nationalistic and not really my cup of tea. But it is a slightly better way or an easier way to consume political content. Ministry of Foreign Affairs has its own WeChat, which is quite useful for just really short summaries of the infamous MFA press kind of conferences. There's a particular WeChat channel for those. While I don't really enjoy that kind of content, it is if you want to tune into that kind of content, then that's normally quite an efficient way to do it. And I'll add a couple of those in the list I share with you, John.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Claudia came back and said, my French is pretty good. We may open a parallel group. So yeah, I'll be setting up
Great.
a community next week. I'll be back in Tokyo on Friday of this week. So I'll set up a community next week. I'll send out links to everybody who's enrolled in the course, and also some little onboarding videos of how to use the platform for those of you who haven't taken any outlier courses before. Those of you who have, you'll be pretty familiar already. So we have one more from William, and then I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. He says, you talked a bit about New York Times and BBC Chinese translations not being great. what about overseas Mandarin language publications like 世界日报 in the U.S.? You may not be familiar
Okay.
with that one.
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so my answer to that question is this. First of all, I'm not necessarily saying the translations are bad in New York Times and BBC. Actually, they're all, generally they're excellent because they've got a lot of resource to put behind it. But they are translations. That's the problem. And as a language learning resource, for me, it's just quite limited. So that's how I would characterize that. No, it's not a good or bad thing. It's just the nature of it means that it's not helpful for language learning, in my opinion. So the US-based media outlets, if I had to recommend one, probably China Digital Times is a good one. So that generally, the focus there is they do an amazing job of gathering censored content that was published in China that then became censored or was taken down. So they're great for gathering that. The US backed, the French, there's a good German one as well, dw.com. So, oh no, but I think your question was US based Chinese language. I generally avoid reading those. It's kind of I would say it's the opposite end of the spectrum of state media propaganda. So it's almost like anti-China propaganda, and therefore it's I much prefer trying to find stuff that is I know the quality is good, and I'm not reading some kind of like extreme view either way. I'm reading about the story that I'm interested in, that's well written. And so far, I've never really dug much into the US-based Chinese language media outlets. There's Wenxue City is one. They're kind of quite gossipy sites. Lots of like flashing things and like images, and they load very quickly. So yeah, but however, I don't know the one you just mentioned, so I would have to look at that.
Yeah, there's
Zoe,
one
do you
in
have any?
Japan too. I can't remember what it's called, but there's like a Chinese language newspaper in Japan as well. I'm not sure if they even have
Right,
a website though. I know every time I go to the
got
embassy,
you.
there's people there trying to, or not the embassy, the immigration office. There's people there trying to pass it out.
Right.
So,
Zoe,
Yeah, I
what are your
just
thoughts
looked it
on that?
up. 世界日报. I just looked it up, and
Yeah.
it's a Taiwanese newsletter based in the US because we don't really cover
Okay.
Taiwanese news. That's why
Yeah.
we are not very familiar with it. I
All
haven't
right.
really read anything in it, so I can't really judge the quality.
All right. All right. But we'll add that onto our list.
to check out, yeah, yeah, and you're right though.
Yeah.
A lot
Okay.
of those
Good.
overseas Chinese publications are biased just in the opposite way, just like you said.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, cool. Well, I think we've covered
Which, by
all.
the way, is fine. I have nothing. Yeah. I just to finish on that, John. I'm cool either way. But for me, it's the language learning piece, and if there's this kind of like if the agenda behind the piece is too strong, then for me you're then compromising on the language learning value of it.
Mm.
Either way. So if it's kind of one extreme or the other, which is why I prefer to try and find relatively independent media outlets.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
Does
sense.
that make sense?
Okay, cool. I think we've covered all the questions in the chat. Is there anything either of you want to add before we wrap up here?
No, I think just to reiterate. Well, first of all, thank you for your interest, and I think Julian, particularly, thanks for you for making the decision on the call.
Yep.
Very decisive of you. And then for those of you on the course, I think the pre-course questionnaire is really important to try and help us with that. And then if you're not ready for the course, then also no problem. Try and use the tips that we've shared today, and hopefully that will help you in your reading. And then don't forget to sign up for the free Slow Chinese newsletter.
Yeah, absolutely. Sign up for that free newsletter. It's a lot of really useful stuff every week. Another thing I wanted to mention, which I think you touched on, but I just wanted to maybe highlight it a little bit more, is that the course is being taught live, but we're going to be recording everything. And once the live course is over, it's going to be self-paced. So for those of you who are in the live course, if you're not able to keep up each week, which is perfectly normal, life gets in the way, you'll be able to watch the recordings whenever you want to, and do that at your own pace. That's the recordings of both the lessons and the Q&A sessions. For anyone who wants to sign up after the live course is finished, which is just a few weeks from now because it's a 5-week course, right? Anyone who wants to sign up after that, it'll be there. The recordings are all there. It's going to be self-paced. You can go through at your own pace. The course community will still be open, so you can ask questions and get your questions answered. So just wanted to make sure to mention that. But if you can join the live course, I highly recommend it. Here's a good one last question real quick. What time will the lessons be?
Yes, so I am UK based, Claudia. John, I think the times we agreed were 7 p.m. Yeah.
Yep, 7 p.m. London.
Yeah, 7 p.m. UK time. Yeah.
So that's Tuesday for the lesson and Friday for the Q&A session. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So I won't be in the live sessions because that's 4 a.m. for me in Tokyo, but I will be watching after the fact, and I'll be in the course community, of course.
Great.
All right, guys. Well, thanks very much for showing up today. I know we've gone a little bit over time, as I always do. So I appreciate you sticking around for it. I guess that's it. I'll go ahead and end it here unless you have anything.
Great. No, thanks very much, John. Look forward to meeting some of the people on the course.
Yep, it's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, guys. Take care.
All right.